Today's conversation is sponsored by First Generation Capital Partners.
What I'm trying to focus on now is really trying to find how I can reach the most people and how I can add the most value. And some of that comes down to finding your audience. And so I had to look at, who do I most align with? And that's really those military folks.
You're listening to the Going Long podcast with Billy Keels, the #1 podcast for long-distance real asset investing.
Welcome to the Going Long podcast. We're back once again to continue to help to educate you so you feel much more comfortable as well as confident investing beyond your backyard. Yep, I'm your host, Billy Keels, and we're back for another amazing conversation. Today, you're going to get so much out of this one, especially, if you have been either in corporate or military and you realize that you can continue to do other things beyond that, well, today's the conversation that you're going to want to check out. So want to also say thank you. We continue to be in the top 1.5% of podcasts globally. Thank you for continuing to leave your honest written reviews as well as your ratings, for tagging us on LinkedIn, for tagging us on Instagram. Awesome. Continue to do that because our community continues to grow, which we're always appreciative of. And so for those of you who are also interested in finding out any of the previous episodes, either the transcripts, the audio, the video, all you need to do is go to firstgencp.com/podcasts. Once again, that's firstgencp.com/podcasts, and you'll find everything that you need just at your fingertips. So as I mentioned before, if you're interested or someone who has been in the military or has worked in the corporate world, communications and strategy, today's a conversation you're going to want to listen to because we have a conversation with Mr. Tim Little, and we're going to get to that conversation just after this. So if you want to understand how passing down lessons to your children can increase your long-distance investing legacy, then guess what? Today's a conversation you're going to want to listen to until the very last word. You know why? Because today's guest not only is the father of 2, he also had several years of active military duty, which I'm sure he's going to tell us a lot more about that. He also had the early part of his corporate career leading communications, and that really, that's always interesting to me, someone who's from a sales and marketing background. He also was able to have some time at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, for most of us who've heard of it. And guess what? He's even the host of a super awesome podcast, Journey to Multifamily Millions. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's conversation the founder of Zana Investments, Mr. Tim Little. Tim, welcome to the show, man.
Billy, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
You know what? I'm super excited that you are here, man. And I am absolutely sure that the entire Going Long family is going to take so much out of this conversation. So I really want to get started because I know you're already prepped and ready and all that kind of good jazz. You know, you're going to get 2 questions in the beginning, you're going to get 3 in the end. And I just kind of want to jump into it if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. Tim, help us understand, man. Where is it that you call home nowadays?
I call home Tampa, Florida.
And that's over on the inside, right? On the Gulf side of things, Gulf of Mexico, for those of us who are maybe not in the US.
Exactly. It's basically the peninsula on the peninsula.
All right. Fantastic. It's a nice place down there. So appreciate that. And then also too, Tim, help me out with spreading some positivity. What's the most positive thing that's happened to or for you in the last 24 hours?
Yeah. So I'd have to say that this morning, so every morning I try to wake up early, around 6 o'clock, not like crazy early, but get out there before I have to get the kids ready for school and all that stuff. And just, help get my mind right, get my steps in because I've been focusing on that too. And this morning on my walk, I saw a guy pushing his car and I was like, oh, I know how much that sucks. And so I stopped and I was like, all right, well, let me go ahead and help him out. And so I helped him push his car to, a repair station that was just down the street. And, he obviously got something out of it. Someone did him a favor. And I also got a better workout that I plan to get going out there this morning. So everybody won in that case.
All right. Fantastic. So you got to add to those steps, got a little push to those steps. So absolutely fantastic. And being able to help others is something that's absolutely fantastic. So appreciate you sharing that with us as well, Tim. And kind of gets to jump into the conversation. So one of the things that the Going Long family already knows about me is I'm a recovering perfectionist. So sometimes I try to do really impossible things, like telling your entire backstory in the opening, 2.5 seconds. That was never going to happen. You've done too much. You've impacted way too many lives. So I was hoping that you could do me a favor and that you could tell your backstory in your own words. Take as much time as you really want. But when you're doing that, I would love for you to share with us, like maybe some of the major decisions that you've made to get to this point in your journey. Then we'll see where you and I take the conversation from there. And before you do that, I would just like to say thank you very much for your service to our country. So thank you very much. And please, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's where it really starts, right? So I went into the Army straight out of high school, a month after graduating, did that for a couple of years, got out, and then went to college, had my fun there. But while I was there, an ROTC recruiter got to me in college and convinced me that I should go back in, this time as an officer. And so I did that and spent about 5 years on active duty as an officer with multiple combat deployments. And after that second one, which was a long one, I said, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and take a break. And I decided I wanted to go back to school. So went to grad school at the University of Denver. And after that is when I really started the corporate thing, right? Working for a consulting firm, working for the government as a strategic communications consultant. And I was doing that for a little while. And that's about the time that I started to get interested in real estate. And I saw a lot of people doing the whole single family thing. And that just seemed to be pervasive through all the things that I was reading, starting off with Bigger Pockets and, some books and stuff like that. But I decided that I didn't want to do single family. If nothing else, I was going to do at least small multifamily. And the biggest reason for that was mitigating risk, right? So if you have one house and it's empty, then you have 0% occupancy. But even if you have a duplex, if at least one of those units is filled and one isn't, you're at 50% occupancy. And that may be enough to offset the mortgage that you're paying. So that's when I was living in the DC area at the time. Probably don't need to tell a lot of people, DC area is and was expensive. And there was no way I could afford a duplex in the DC area. So I started, looking a little broader out, those concentric circles. And I saw that in Richmond, it was something that I think I could afford. And so that's when, I saved up the money that I needed, which I found out was like 25% down payment for an investment property, and managed to buy like a 100-year-old house that was split in half and was a duplex in Richmond, Virginia. Bought that for like $85,000. And really that started me on my real estate journey. And after that, I decided that I wanted to kind of move up to the multifamily side of things. So I really started exploring that more, be it through podcasts and then going to conferences and stuff like that. And then meanwhile, on the civilian side, like the work side, I started to get a little bored with the whole corporate environment. And even once I got to HUD, just the day-to-day 9 to 5 things always being the same. And so like a lot of military guys, I decided to hop back onto active duty orders. And so I wound up being on active duty orders again for about 4 years until I wound up coming off of active duty orders in order to try to get my multifamily business, really lay the foundation for that. Because what I had started to do was get into syndications, commercial multifamily. And after having done one deal as a passive investor and really getting the proof of concept there that this is a real thing, after that, I decided, hey, I want to do this full time. And so I got on one deal as a general partner, and we could talk more about that. But then once I came off orders, after talking with my wife and us agreeing on that, she's holding down the fort, in terms of the income. But I tried to be smart about it and saved up enough money while I did have that consistent W-2 income that I could pay off the mortgage or pay the mortgage for the next 2 years so that I could really start to lay that foundation for doing commercial real estate investing full time. And that's kind of where I find myself today.
All right. That's absolutely fantastic. I may actually even have you kind of lay out a little bit more of that, because I think it's really interesting, the thing that you just shared, because you just shared something there at the end in terms of the coordination, the conversations, then the coordination with your spouse. But I think that's one of the things that kind of gets lost a lot of times, Tim, is that you do need a runway, right? And you need that runway in order to be able to get to closer to your goals. I'll tell you, because it took me a decade. It took me almost a decade while I was working in my corporate role to get to a point where it was like, all right, well, it's okay. Like, I like my job, but I don't really love it. And there's some other stuff that I wanted to be able to do. But it sounds like you really had that coordinated, and you talked about the way that you were balancing or looking at your, you didn't actually say it, which is what I kind of want you to say. You're looking at your income, but also your expenses, and coordinating that runway for the two of you or for your family. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that aspect, because I think it's one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about. And then we'll get into kind of the other conversations points.
Yeah, absolutely. And those conversations are so crucial, especially if you do have a significant other. So what had happened was actually, my wife had been in a company for about 9 years, and she wound up getting laid off because of a merger, right? And so it's one of those, your job is redundant now. We're sorry, but here's 20 weeks of pay or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And so we had that discussion of, hey, you could go back to work right away, but you also said you wanted to get your MBAs. And if there was ever a time to do it, you might as well do it now. So luckily, the severance that she got was enough to pay for her MBA. And I was like, I'll hold things down, because we were used to being a dual income family. But I was like, I knew we could get by being a single income. And so I said, you take these 2 years to just go full through and get your MBA, because it takes so long if you're doing it, distance and over time. And I was like, and at the end of that 2 years, we'll tag off, and then hopefully I'll be able to go ahead and start trying to do this full time. And we agreed on it. And like you said, a lot of people talk about, hey, let's burn the bridges, and that'll be the motivation you need to succeed. Or you'll just fail miserably and not have any money. So being a military guy, I like to go into things with a plan. And so the plan was, I'll save up enough money that I can pay the highest expense that we have, which is the mortgage. And then she was just going to pay everything else. And so that way it gave her that peace of mind that this is a viable plan, that we can move forward with this, because she is more risk averse than I am. And so that's exactly what I did. And I've been paying the mortgage ever since.
Fantastic. So you had the communication between the two of you. It's like you said, she went first, then you went, but you coordinated the conversation and were able to agree on how you would handle that. Because ultimately, it's something that they're aspirations that the two of you had individually and then also collectively as a family. So one of the other things that I wanted to ask you, because it's kind of one of the things that teed it up at the very beginning, I know that you have a very strong focus on family, right? And your kids, and being able to share your knowledge. What's the driver there? And then also, how are you living that out on a day-to-day basis to be able to really help to empower your children and educate your children and help them to gain the knowledge that maybe it took you a little bit longer to gain?
Yeah. And the driver is really just getting those lessons that, I didn't feel I got as a kid. And it's no hit on my parents. It's just, if they didn't have that financial knowledge, that Agreed. Savvy, they don't know how to pass it on. Yep. They passed on other things like being, I don't want to say cheap, thrifty, and, finding good deals and stuff like that. And that's stuff like I hated when I was a kid, but I've seen that I still have within me and still practice. But in terms of how we do it, it's really just finding the day-to-day lessons that you can teach. So I'll give a perfect example. Like what I wound up doing with that duplex, instead of just selling it outright, is I did a 1031 exchange into a triplex here in St. Pete, so that I had a property that was close enough that I could self-manage. That's a whole nother issue, a glutton for punishment. But what I would do is I would take my daughter with me when I would go down there to work on the apartment. And I would explain to her, hey, people pay to live in here. They give us the money and then we pay the mortgage. I'd have her turning screws or, throwing a hammer, not doing a whole lot, but just so that she sees and understands. And Otherwise, it's about just finding little examples. I found like a game where she could start her own lemonade stand in the game, right? And there's all these wrenches that they throw in there. Oh, like the whole crop of lemons, got some disease. So and all this, and so she has to think through how that impacts supply, demand. And the ironic part is she did a lot better than I did at the game because she just kept raising the price of her lemonade as long as people were willing to pay for it. And I was like, I couldn't do that because I was like, there's no way someone's going to pay $14 for a glass of lemonade. And so luckily, kids don't have these preconceived notions that sometimes like hold us back. So it's really just about finding those little day-to-day lessons that you can talk to them about.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate you sharing that. And when you're able to, I remember taking my boys to see some of the smaller multifamilies that they had, and it was a very similar conversation. And also, Tim, like my parents only taught me what they knew because they didn't know what they didn't know. And so it's a very similar process. And I relate a lot to what you're saying just because I've been down a very similar path, and being able to share that with the kids, and then the ideas that are going in their minds, and really, and how much do they pay you, and all this, and how do you determine that? And so sometimes, like you said, with your daughter, you just keep raising the price until, guess what? people stop buying. So one of the things I did want to come back, because you said after your second deployment is when you actually got started investing. And one of the very first in real estate or real assets, let's say, one of the things that you mentioned is you thought about the risk mitigation side of things, that you didn't want to go to a single family because, either being 50% sounded a whole lot better than being 0% occupied. And I tend to agree with you on that one as well. But what was it about real estate concretely, other than the people that you were talking about? Because you chose to focus your time, efforts, and energy into learning more in that space versus learning about, commodities, or learning about the stock market or something like that. Maybe you could give us a sense of kind of what took you down that path.
Yeah. So what I tell people is that it makes sense to me. I can see it, I can touch it. And the analogy that I give to a lot of people is like the stock market, right? Like I feel it's too emotionally driven, and it's driven by circumstances that I have absolutely no control over. And with real estate, I can increase the value of that asset. I can make it worth more. Whereas I cannot do that with a stock. It doesn't matter how many Cokes I drink. I am not going to push up the value of Coke stock. It just isn't going to happen. But I can, refurbish the interior, paint up the outside, and add granite countertops to a property. And voila, I've increased the value because, the price that I can get for the rent has gone up. So that's how I tend to look at it.
Okay. And I just wanted to make sure, because I think sometimes it's easy to get blocked and say you have to come up with this master plan, or the reason that you went this way is because, the 85% of the wealthiest people in the world. But like, it can be as simple as what Tim just said. It makes sense to you. And if it makes sense to you, then that gives you the inspiration to go down the path to become more educated, learn more. And eventually, as the things that Tim was talking about, being able to, collectively meet other people and do things like that. Speaking of which, Tim, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about, as you went from kind of the theory to the practical application, also understanding that network and being able to surround yourselves with people that are, a couple steps ahead of you. Kind of how has that taken place, and what has that really brought to you, and what you're even doing today at Zana Investments?
Yeah. And so, the network is so important. I mean, it sounds cliche to say, your network is your net worth, but it really does make a difference because you can, learn and talk to and just vent to these people who are facing these same challenges, or have already overcome some of the challenges that you're now facing. And so what I did, I started out like a lot of people, again, on like Bigger Pockets and stuff like that, going back and forth, talking to people, learning from them. And then I sought out like coaching, right? And so maybe like lower level coaching, something that I felt like I could afford, rather than the $20,000 or $30,000 coaching. I was like, okay, I feel confident enough to commit $5,000 to, hiring this coach. And then as your knowledge grows, as your investments grow, so too should that, I won't even say money, that investment that you're willing to put into yourself to get in those places where you're surrounding yourself with people. And it's not to say that you can't do it by just going to like conferences, because that's definitely another great way to meet those people. But if you want to, shorten that learning curve, I think that coaching, mentorship, whatever you want to call it, definitely has a huge impact on that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I appreciate you sharing that. It is finding the right level for yourself where you feel like, okay, look, I'm going to invest this amount in myself. And then as you continue to level up, well, you start to recognize that there is also a lot of different access to insights that you gain as you continue to level up and surrounding yourself with different people. So I appreciate that. And, I don't know if there's, I guess, because it's pretty close. We have to get into the going along final 3 minutes. This time like flies by. Just curious if there's things that you can share. I don't know if you have maybe models or frameworks that you typically are thinking about or using. You talked about the children earlier, but maybe models or frameworks that you have found are very useful for you in terms of either making decisions in terms of where you're going to place your time and energy in terms of education, or maybe even how you're applying it with Zana Investments.
Yeah, and so it's always hard, right? Because you're always looking at where is the best return on investment for both time and money, and that's not always explicitly clear, right? Like there's some things that have a very specific value, but then how do you value the relationships in, like, say, a network or an organization that you're aligned with, and so that becomes difficult. And so I don't know that I have a good framework for determining that necessarily. What I'm trying to focus on now is really trying to find how I can reach the most people and how I can add the most value. And some of that comes down to like something I'm sure you went through, is finding your audience. And it can't just be high net worth individuals. Like, okay, great, you're going to help high net worth individuals. Well, and so I had to look at, who do I most align with? And that's really those military folks, right? Mm-hmm. Either people who are retired, and so they have that pension coming to them, and maybe they have that second career. So they have more money than they've had in the past. And what I found is a lot of these folks, because they move so often, they have 2, 3 single family houses that they've kind of accrued over the years. And it wasn't intentional investments necessarily, but it's something that they've held on to because they saw it could be an investment. But at a certain point, it winds up being almost more of a burden than it does a benefit, especially if they're not getting nearly as much cash flow as they thought they would. And that's where, I can come in and present solutions to say, hey, you did the right things. You thought about how you could, make your money work harder. But if you're looking to get away from being so hands-on, here's a way that I can help you be more passive, right? You can take that money, liquidate those assets, whatever the case may be, one at a time, all at once. And you can invest that money passively. You still get all the same amazing tax benefits, but you lose many of the headaches.
Yeah. And I appreciate you giving us that perspective on things and, being able to recognize in your audience and how you are, continuing to serve your audience that's out there. So, sorry, one last thing, and then we'll get into the going along final 3. I promise. And I guess since it's my show, then I'm not going to get in trouble for asking another question. So you did decide to, I talked about it in the very beginning, right? Journey to Multifamily Millions. Talk to us about that. I know, and welcome to the podcast community. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, the focus area and things like that as well.
Yeah. And obviously I haven't been in the game as long as you have. We're on episode about 49 right now. And
that's a lot of episodes, man. Congratulations. That is a lot of episodes. Well done.
Thanks. Yeah. I guess it is when, you always hear that statistic that most people don't get past episode 7. So
7. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'll call it a win. But it was a little intimidating at first, but I've actually really grown to enjoy it. I enjoy having the conversations and, just bringing in people of all different backgrounds who are somehow related to this ecosphere of investing in real estate, whether it's, lawyers, insurance people, or the investors themselves.
Yeah, no, it's pretty awesome, man. And like I said, welcome. So, I guess here's the thing, Tim. We kind of have to get to the going long final three, and I never ask any of our guests. And today you're our very special guest, unless you tell me that you're ready. So my question for you is: are you ready?
I'm ready.
I knew you'd be ready, man. Here we go. So this is the guy from Columbus, Ohio, who started out with you over in Florida. But I want to bring things back to this side of the pond because this is where I've been living for over 2 decades. And so I would love for you to share with us, Tim, what is your favorite European city that you've either visited or is still on your bucket list to visit?
Yeah, and that's a tough one. So I was thinking about it last night, and I think I have to go with Berchtesgaden, Germany.
Oh,
it's in Bavaria, and fortunately or unfortunately, it's probably most known for being the home of the Eagle's Nest, which is where like Hitler had his holidays. But it's very close to the Austrian border, not too far from Salzburg, and it's just a beautiful place. You have the mountains, and if you go in spring or summer, you have the green fields. And I went there when I was 16 years old as part of a student foreign exchange. And I've been back to Germany and Europe in general multiple times, but that one just kind of sticks with me because of how picturesque it was.
Berchtesgaden. All right, perfect. So got a big shout out to Germany. So we will make sure to include that in the show notes. And then it comes to question number 2. And here's the thing, question number 2, sometimes I make this big, long, drawn out thing, but I won't do that today because I really want you to be able to share. Like whenever you're trying something new, you have a tendency to, you're doing it for the first time. And maybe there is a mistake or a learning opportunity. I don't know what verbiage you use, but whatever result you were looking for, it didn't happen. And usually when that happens, especially when it's something that's a relevant mistake or learning opportunity, you stop and say, okay, well, really what happened here? And you draw lessons from that. So I don't want you to think about the mistake, but as you think about that one time that it happened, like what is the biggest lesson that you learned as a result of that learning opportunity mistake that was made that that someone today in the Going Long family needs to hear? What's the one lesson you want to share with us?
Yeah. So I'd say if there's anyone out there who's thinking about, becoming an active commercial real estate investor, being a general partner on deals, people get really excited when they're at that stage and they just want to get into a deal. Don't rush to do that before you've vetted the partners that are going to be on that deal with you. Because I found myself in a situation where I was eager to get into a deal. The deal looked good enough. And I was like, all right, I just want another deal. Be a general partner on another deal. What I didn't do is I knew my immediate partners, the ones who brought me in, but I didn't know the other partners who had more of a controlling stake in the deal. And what I discovered later is that their values didn't align with mine. The way they conduct business didn't align with the way I would have conducted business. And I felt like, they didn't keep the promises to the tenants that, we as new owners should be going in with. And so I would just say, make sure that you know who you're partnering up with, because it can be easy to get excited about just getting in on a deal. And luckily that was a deal that I didn't have any investors' money in. It was just my money, and lost a little bit, not much, but more so than that, I really did not appreciate the fact that my values didn't align with theirs.
All right, that makes sense. So don't rush to it and make sure there's a value alignment. So that makes a lot of sense. And then it's going to get us into going. This is the final of the Going Long final 3. And this is really about helping to fill our minds up with knowledge. And so for those of you that are watching the video version, and if you're not, by the way, you should go check out the video version because, well, you'll get to see Tim and you get to see me and you get to see all the cool books that he has behind him. Because now what I'd love for you to do is recommend one book to the Going Long family. What one book would that be?
Yeah. And so I think I'm going to go with Influence by Robert Cialdini. And you can see it's right there.
There you go.
Yeah. The yellow and purple one. It is not a short read, but especially if you get it on Audible, it's awesome to listen to because you learn so much about human psychology and why we do the things we do, buy the things we buy, and get convinced about things and how to defend against it. which is a really interesting aspect that I haven't heard in other books about persuasion and psychology and stuff like that.
All right, fantastic, Mr. Cialdini with influence. And listen, Tim, I just think about the very beginning of the conversation when you're talking to us about your active duty and you're going back, you get the ROTC program, and then you met an officer who's telling you all these cool things. And afterwards you went away to your second deployment and you started recognizing, well, you got some interest in real estate and you wanted to figure out things, but you wanted to mitigate the risk. And you knew that 50% was better than 0%. So you decided, don't want to do the single family stuff, at least want to do the smaller multifamily. Did that, got your reps, got the things that you were looking to gain in terms of just moving from theory to practice. Also recognize that, hey, listen, you can even start to scale this. And then as you start to scale, you mentioned to us before, you even had life happen for you. And you talked about the way that you communicated that with your spouse, and each one of you got to go after your own goals and then collectively be able to do that for your family. The way that you continue to help to educate your children based on the knowledge and network and access that you have so that they can even push it forward. Heck, I mean, even one of your kids was telling you to keep raising the prices on the lemonade, man, until people stop buying. So all of these different things, and the way that you're also going out today with Zana Investments, I'm sure that the Going Long family is like, yeah, Billy, just asking the question. So I'm going to ask the question. What's the best way for the Going Long family to find out more about what you're doing, Tim, and what you're doing at Zana Investments?
Sure. And so people can contact me directly at tim@zanainvestments.com. That's just ZANA. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I encourage everyone to follow or connect with me on there. And then I would like to offer your listeners a free cheat sheet to the first 33 terms that they need to know to be confident passive investors. And they can get that by going to zanainvestments.com/cheat sheet. And
awesome.
Yeah. And finally, you already talked about the podcast. So again, I would be honored if people would check that out if they're interested in commercial multifamily, especially. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Fantastic. Well, listen, Tim, on behalf of the entire Going Long family, I want to say thank you very much for deciding to invest your time with me and with us today, and wishing you continued success. Thank you very much. Thank you, Billy. Appreciate it. Yeah, man, no problem. Give me like 10 seconds really quickly, Tim. I'm just going to wrap things up and we'll get you out of here. So Going Long family, look, I mean, Tim, he kept it real today. He left your knowledge on the table. He's wanting you to be able to not just go to understand the theory, but heck, do like his daughter, put it into practice. Who knows what's waiting for you on the other side? A lot of positive opportunities. Take today's conversation, share it with 2 or 3 other friends, family member, get together, talk about the topics, take the topics that are theoretical, put them into practice, and find out what's waiting on the other side for you. So while you're doing that, I'll be here preparing for the next conversation. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very much.